Hello, everybody. This is Tommy Newberry. Welcome to another edition of Achieving Optimal. We have a special guest this episode, Gary Ryan Blair. And Gary Ryan Blair is an author, a motivational expert, somebody that I have followed and studied for a long time. When I think of Gary Ryan Blair, I think of the 100-Day Challenge. You may think of him that way as well. He is also known as the goals guy, and I love that. And then there's one other phrase that when I think of Gary Ryan Blair comes to mind, and that is everything counts. It's one of the most important principles of success. Everything counts, whether it's Sunday night, Friday morning, Thursday at noon, everything counts. Gary and I got together for this special episode kind of quickly. We're both in temporary locations because of weather issues and that kind of thing, but we're going to talk about some important principles of individual success and also how do those principles relate to a successful nation. Gary, fantastic to have you with us today. Thank you for joining us, especially on short notice.
Tommy, I'm so delighted to be here, and I appreciate you having me. But I've got to tell you, I just made it here at the last minute because I was listening to your previous podcast with Madison Cawthorn.
Yeah.
I certainly know his name. I didn't know his story, but what an impressive young man. And you did him justice. That was a wonderful podcast.
Well, it's incredible to see somebody that has gone through that kind of experience and has achieved what he has achieved. Yeah. And as I was sitting there in North Carolina with him, it was another motivator. You know, when you see these people, it makes you think like the slogan of the Paralympics, the old slogan is, "What's your excuse?" And so he had every excuse in the world to depend on others. And instead he chose to be self-reliant and to think big. And I think he's going to be the next new congressman in North Carolina.
I think you are right. I do think you are right. You know, I'll tell you what I love about it. I know we've got some stuff we want to talk about, but my own personal mission is to inspire, to promote, and celebrate excellence. And I've always told people, especially my kids, when I talk to them, I have two boys and a young girl, and I said, if anything else, be the most inspiring person in the room, and inspire people to think better, eat cleaner, run faster, anything you can. And that young man, in listening to the interview, that I was inspiring and invigorating and empowering. It was just well done. But
great.
It's nice to see a future leader. And like I said, you did him proud. You did him well.
Well, thank you very much. And one of the things, one last thing on Madison is, I'm there and we look around at all the issues we're having in the country and the world at large. And you see some young people, because he just turned 25 on August 1st, but we see a lot of young people, and to anybody with common sense, they look like they're rather lost or scattered or confused as to what is up and what is down. And so I left that conversation thinking, I'm very optimistic knowing that there are people like him that are out there that are hungry to be leaders. And he believes from a faith standpoint that he was, this is, kind of part of the mission, that the horrible accident gave him a platform.
Yeah.
So Gary, let's talk about success. First of all, tell me and everybody else, not everybody maybe knows how long you've been doing what you're doing or about the power of the 100-Day Challenge. But so tell us about how you positively impact people through your coaching and speaking, but especially through the 100-Day Challenge.
Well, I'm often asked, what do I do for a living? And I tell folks I challenge people. And to paraphrase it, I always say that, the one common denominator for each one of us is that we're all in the results business. And as strange as that is, that might be odd to some people, but, I always usually start off with an open-ended question. I said, what is a surgeon, a beautician, a plumber, you name it, or a locksmith, what do they have in common? And people scratch their head. And I said, they're all responsible for delivering results. I said, we get paid for delivering some kind of a successful outcome. And my job, more than anything else, and what I focus in on, is how to get people to do it with less effort and do it in a rapid format. So the primary emphasis for me A lot of it comes from military, which is a big part of my background and family. And I'm a devotee, if you will, of General Patton, who basically said that wars are not won by defensive tactics.
Excellent.
And I do believe that goals and dreams are not won passively, and that the best thing that you can do is to deploy a strong, relentless offense. Because behaviors such as procrastination, excuse making, self-doubt, pity, or any of those things, these are behaviors that you engage in when you play not to lose. It's a defensive posture, and you'll never win in life that way. So what I try to do, and I make it real simple, win bigger, faster. And that's what I focus in on.
I love that. When a lot of my clients were, well, the whole world, but in the country, and then my clients included, when we were hit with a shutdown, we had a phrase that was very similar to that became our mantra, which was better, stronger, faster.
Sure.
Just BSF, better, stronger, faster. And most of them are not, athletes, world-class athletes or something like that. But I said, what that symbolizes, not just survival during this kind of adversity, but thriving, getting ahead, taking this difficulty and turning it into something better. Maybe coming out on the other side of it better than you would have been if it never hit us at all. And I think that all starts with the mindset, right?
It really does. And the interesting part about it is there's so much to learn. And I think very often we need to go back to fundamentals, which I know we're going to talk about. But history teaches us a lot as to how to deal with things today. And if you go back to Greek, it's not even Greek mythology. This is the way the Greeks lived. There's a terminology called an agon. It's spelled AGON. And very simple definition, the Greeks were big believers that you need daily challenge, you need daily struggle, and you needed physical, emotional, spiritual, psychological, team building, all of these different things, and that you were here to test yourself, to overcome challenges and so forth. And we live in a society right now, and I think a large part of it is technology-based because it removed a lot of problems, it removed a lot of difficulties, and people really don't know what it means to, I tend to say it, to suffer, to really pay the price, and to really earn something that takes a long time in order to manifest. So, to me, there's a lot to learn from how the Greeks and the Spartans lived, quite frankly.
Yes, and a phrase, a word that comes to my mind that, as you were describing that, was safe.
Yeah.
SAFE, and it just seems that has risen as a value in this nation in such a bizarre way, not just relative to COVID, but prior to that, there were the notion of safe spaces on, I guess, college campuses and things like that. And then, our schools in Atlanta closed in anticipation of heavy thunderstorms moving in yesterday, in an effort to keep everybody safe. And I'm thinking everything is so protected that it's like we're protecting people from adversity or from struggle, or as you said, from suffering, when isn't that the primary catalyst for growth?
Well, it is. Well, just look at nature. And I think nature is a wonderful guide because, there's a couple of lessons to learn from this. But, those trees that grow up nice and tall and proud, trees and nature itself needs to be exposed to the elements of winter, of storms, of winds, of turbulence, of change of temperature and climate and so forth. So it can continue to be strong and vibrant and serve its purpose. We're exactly the same way. Unfortunately, there's a lot of things that we do to create what I call protective posturing, which is not the right way to live. Yeah. The other thing as it relates to, because I know we're going to get into the 100-day challenge and about growth, but what I love about Mother Nature, and this is the thing, because what's always gotten me is people believe these tapes that it takes a long time to create change, to transform. And I don't subscribe to that belief system. And I use nature as my guide. See, a farmer could plant seeds in one season, put them down today, let's say, okay? And in 90 days, just one season, they could reap beautiful corn, lettuce, cabbage, asparagus, whatever the case might be. It doesn't take too long. It's amazing that you can go from a small seed to an abundant harvest in a 90, 100-day period of time, which is extraordinary. And we see that happening in nature, but we for some reason, we can't apply these principles towards our own life.
Yeah, it's you can learn a lot from the farmer. You can learn a lot from those who deal with the seasons. When I think of that 100 days, I'm kind of thinking that's a season.
It is.
And we're so impatient today. We want everything quickly. And I think that interrupts that natural time seasoning where you plant and then you nurture, and then the results come forth if you've taken care of them. So let's go. But I love the kind of the thought of we're all here. We should be all here to create results and to serve others with those results. And our rewards in life tend to be in proportion to the results and the service and the value that we add to others. So let's talk about some of the principles of individual success. And I might start with personal responsibility or self-reliance. Where would you start if you were describing the fundamentals of individual success?
Okay. The first thing is to give you my definition of a goal and work it backwards. And I always tell people the goal is a glorious celebration of all that's good and virtuous about the human condition. And what I mean by that is if you achieve a goal with honor, you have demonstrated commitment, you've demonstrated decisiveness, you've demonstrated integrity, you've demonstrated consistency, you've demonstrated discipline, you've demonstrated all that is good and virtuous about the human condition. So what that means is the best thing for us to do in order to understand success is to unpack it and focus in on the foundational principles that drive it. Many of those we just shared and spoke about. But tell me, there's so many different ways that kind of people look at these things and so forth. And I think we make it much more difficult than it needs to be. And this is why I like the idea, and we had spoken briefly before this whole thing began about founding principles of our own country and so forth, that everything does go back to first principles, goes back to foundational basics. And I think the key to success moving forward, especially after a massive downturn and a punishing 2020 for most, if not all of us in some way, shape, or form, is to go back to our roots, is to go back to the fundamentals and sit back and say, okay, if I were to start this from scratch all over again, how would I build a civil society? How would I build a career that not necessarily makes me more money, but that makes me fulfilled? And I think we need to change the questions and then focus in on the behaviors that drive those things.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's almost anytime you have a difficulty, maybe it's in a relationship or it's in a business or there's a health scare, that the solution is almost always back to the fundamentals, back to the basics, as opposed to let's try to reinvent the basics, or let's try to manufacture something that's more complicated, sophisticated, and expensive than it needs to be, and just get back to the simple steps. But one of those things that are fundamentals are goals. Why do you think so few people, so few Americans, let's just get right down to it, why do so few Americans set goals?
I'll tell you exactly what it is. When we're younger, unless it's taught at home, and that's the key, unless it's taught at home, everything is told, you're told what to do. You're told where to be first period, second period, third period. You're told what time your lunch is. You're told what time to get on the bus.
When you can go to the bathroom.
That's exactly right. And this is, I think, is a real downfall of society because it doesn't foster creative thinking. It doesn't foster individuality. It doesn't foster, somebody to dream. And quite frankly, again, unless that is fostered at home. And it's so easy for people to fall into that pattern. Well, 18 years of that does a pretty good job of conditioning people to think small, wait for advice or a lead from somebody else, wait for somebody to tell you what to do. And very often people wind up working for an organization. And I can tell you from a lot of employers, a lot of them are saying, we're the self-starters. It's like everyone's waiting for me to tell them what to do. And that is it's not just a problem, it's an epidemic in this country. It really is.
Yeah, well, I think it's, you could go through almost the entire high school level education, you could go to college, and you could go to grad school, and you would hardly get any reference to goal setting at all, because the people they have many other virtues, but those that are in the academic world are not usually the self-starters, the go-getters, the ones that are the risk takers. And it's almost like you have to be waiting, if you're an entrepreneur at heart, if you're a self-reliant individual, you have to almost be biding your time to get out to where you can be completely free to live your life the way you want to live it. Because I think being aware of that, or if you're growing up and your parents are sharing the importance of goals, or they're imploring you to set the goals, you begin to think a little bit differently and you see a different world out there. But otherwise, I think you get programmed from that 12 years maybe, or 15 years or 16 years of education where you're told what to do and what to think,
Yes.
and then you're just a follower. And so we have so many followers. That to me is, it's almost today, if you're trying to be a leader and an innovator and you're trying to think out of the box, and you can kind of envision different people that are out there, you get criticized heavily, if not canceled, I guess is the term that is used today, for thinking differently than the masses. So it's really like the country or the society or the media is trying to just create more followers, right?
They are, and to even take it one step further, I call it a multi-generational conspiracy, and it's continued, and it continues and continues. Let's look at it, because your question really was a very good one. It was, why do few people set goals? So let's give another perspective on it, which I think will be very helpful. We both know about Jim Rohn's work, and Jim came up with this concept of the 4 seasons. It was brilliant. And I want to paraphrase that and give you my twist on it and answer the question this way. If you take the average U.S. life expectancy, this is the reason how they come out with actuarial tables for life insurance and so forth. They'll tell us the average American man will live to 72 years old. A female will be about 74, maybe 74.5. But that's the average across the board. Some will live longer, any shorter. That's the medium. Okay. So that being said, let's use that 72 and divide it up by 4. So we got chapter 1, if you will, is 1 to 18. That's when you were born. From birth to 18 years old, that is spring, okay? Springtime, guess what has to happen in spring? This is what the farmer does. The farmer plants seeds, feeds seeds of abundance, seeds of prosperity, seeds of contribution, seeds of discipline. You teach and nurture and fertilize and do everything you possibly can. That's what a parent's role, a teacher's role, and so forth. Unfortunately, what happens for many people is they're told to sit still, stand in line, do as you're told, raise your hand, don't do this, don't do that. This is going to happen to you, and these are the consequences. And they condition you to think small. So so that when it finally comes time for people to go into the next season, which is 19 to 36, this is summer. And if you take the time to look at every Olympic athlete, every professional athlete, you look at any models and so forth, even entertainers for the most part, this is your peak time. This is your time to shine. Well, what happens with many kids that are coming out of high school that have been conditioned to think small and to conform to whatever Kool-Aid they've been drinking for these 18 years, they finally get to the time where now they can make decisions on their own. They can go out and demonstrate boldness. They can go out and take on the world and so forth. And they're so soft. They're so mentally weak. Their self-reliance skills are so compromised. Their self-esteem is minimized, is marginalized, that they're afraid. So now they spend that chapter when they'll never be stronger. And if you look at every professional athlete, the time for them to shine is that 19 to 36 year age, and it's over with. Tom Brady's a fluke of nature. That's the reality from that standpoint, being 42 and still playing in the NFL. But the majority of those guys, they've come and gone already. Then you go into the next season. From there, you just work your way through from 37 right on through to 54. And you do the math. That's, your income earning years. And then you go into the last chapter, if you will, and you want to enjoy your life. But essentially, life really is 4 unique seasons. The biggest injustice that's happening in family and in church, in school and in government is that people are just conditioned to think small and to be dependent upon somebody to think this way, to do this thing and so forth. And that has to change. There's no,
Yeah, it
I'm
seems,
sorry?
Gary, like it's not only thinking small, but it's thinking same. It's thinking the same, and that sameness. So the other thing, and the goals are so important. I think if you haven't really accepted responsibility for your life, then there's not that much motivation to set the goal. But if you go back to the root, you were kind of describing the root cause,
Yeah.
which means when you get to the point where you should have, the world as your oyster, you don't know what to do with it. And I think if we don't know what to do, we tend to just follow. We tend to just do what everybody else is doing. We conform, to the wrong group. But there's another, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, but you're absolutely right. And that has now propagated an entire community, if you will, of so-called influencers. These people on Instagram who are, quite frankly, in desperate need of somebody's likes and clicks and hellos or hearts or whatever. But very often these people are just phonies themselves, whether it's pictures with cars or with jets or certain lifestyles. It's all manufactured. There's nothing real about it. And then the very thing that kids are aspiring to is not only is it the wrong image, but it's being constantly promoted and bombarded to them that this is the way with which to be able to do things. So the overabundance of stimulation of the wrong messaging is another big problem. It really is. This is why, one of the things I talk about, I call it the law of exposure. And years ago, was it Brenda Burns? Said, what was a woman who Burns? I don't know her last name was Burns. Came up with the movie The Secret. Remember that?
Yes.
Okay. And
Rhonda Burns, was it Rhonda?
There you go, Rhonda. Thank you. And I laughed at it personally. I got called and interviewed and so forth, and I'm like, I don't believe in what you're talking about. I said, I can't sit here and envision. And I'll tell you a funny story if you want to hear about it at the end. You'll get a kick out of this. And I said, what we need to concentrate on is the law of exposure. We need to expose our kids. Okay, that's why I love shows like Shark Tank, quite frankly. I like, different things to be able to expose them to different music, to different dance, to history, to art and everything else. The problem is what kids are being exposed to, what parents allow them to, is the wrong messaging and the wrong people and so forth. It's not that the good stuff isn't out there. It is. It's just, unfortunately, they're exposing their minds to the wrong thing. It's got to be pure. It's got to be right. It's got to be just. It's got to be lovely. It's got to be inspirational. And it should never be, just all about flash and throwing around dollar bills and all this type of stuff. And unfortunately, that stuff is it's significant. It is.
It is, and I love the words you were just reeling off there, because I wrote a book about those words. Called the 4-8 principle. So you were kind of highlighting the virtues laid out by the Apostle Paul in Philippians 4:8, when he said, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is lovely, pure, true, gracious, just, if there's any excellent, think on these things. And you simply can't plant seeds that are lovely, pure, and true, and excellent. You can't plant those kinds of pure seeds and have bad stuff come out. And then what you were just talking about is you can't put the bad exposures in and have good stuff come out. And to me, that is the biggest cultural problem that is affecting the masses is it's happening on the individual level when people are allowing, we used to hear when we were probably starting our careers, the computer axiom GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, GIGO, but it really can be used as good in, good out. But the principle behind it is the same, that what you put in comes out, and I don't think anything comes out of us that we haven't first put in us. So if individually everybody is watching all of this timely, low value content, it's not only affecting their spirit, their mind, their soul, but it's displacing what they could have been putting there. There's an opportunity cost that is lost. In addition to the fact that I have this concern for young people. Let me ask about I want to say what it is, and then I want to see how you would address it. And then I want to move into kind of the culture and how that affects us, all of us as individuals. But it seems to me that a lot of people today don't think at all. Young people in particular don't seem to have many original thoughts because they're not even meaning this necessarily. It's just they're either with friends, or more often than not, they're watching their phones. And so their thought life is a response to other thoughts. Whereas when you and I were growing up, we'd have long periods of time where we had to originate our own thoughts. You know, we were bored. We were waiting for somebody to pick us up. There was this spare time. We either had to be relational or we had to be imaginative.
Mm-hmm.
And now, if you're bored for about 4 seconds, you grab your phone and you're stimulated. And it's not like most people are grabbing their phone and they're reading your book or my book or the Bible or something like that. They're exposing themselves. So if you had to parent all over again in this day and age, what would you do differently given the threats to the young people today about the media that's coming in, but also the conformity of thought that is being pushed on young people like never before?
Well, I appreciate the question, and I just change a little bit because it's not that what would I do differently myself, because I'll tell you this much. My wife and I were very diligent from day one that we wanted to make sure the kids were exposed. Now, the challenge is you send them off to school, they go to a party, they come back, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, where'd you pick this up from, and all of this type of stuff. And it's unfortunate. They can't go to a party without hearing music that I don't find, entertaining or enjoyable or what have you. And that just seems to be today's music and so forth. And I don't want to come across as an old turd, but it's just, I think there's a lot more. Here's the, the funny thing about it is what we need to do more than anything else is really take the time to think through is, look at business and equate it to life. And this may sound like if giving me maybe a minute or two to explain this, I think this will make all the sense in the world.
Yeah, love to.
Talk about goals and things in life. To me, everyone talks about when it comes to a website, you need a conversion rate, and you do. You need a high conversion rate. And what I do try to get people to understand is you also need that when it comes to your goals. You need to be able to quickly convert an idea into a result. You need to be able to quickly take a problem, turn it into a solution. You need to quickly be able to turn, illness into health. That's really what it is. And you're on either side. You're either perpetuating or you're converting. And I teach the skill of rapid conversion. That being said, let's take that to the next. And the next, to me, as it relates to business, a very important measurement or metric is what I call lifetime value. And, it's one thing to be able to convert somebody quickly and bring revenue into your business. It's another thing to create revenue for a lifetime. And you want to keep customers into whether it's a continuity program or something along that way where they're continuing to like your stuff and stay with you and everything else. Okay, life is very much the same way. Is that what we need to understand is that you have to decide what are going to be the lifetime principles, the lifetime values, the lifetime whatever it is. And unfortunately, what many people are creating and what society is creating people is loyalty to behaviors, loyalty to beliefs, loyalty and fidelity, if you will, to negativity, to sarcasm, to cynicism, to eating poor food and to do all these different types of things. You talk about opportunity cost, there's a consequential cost to come to all of this as well, long-term wise. So the thing that parents need is they need a long-term perspective and say to themselves, when my kids finally do leave the house at 18 or 25 or what have you, what are the values and the principles with which we want them to champion?
Yes.
And I tell every parent, one thing you need to do is sit back and say to yourself is, what are the 20 things that your daughter, your son needs to master by the time they're 18? Not just understand, but master by the time they're 18. And if you just take the time to answer that question and focus the next 18 years of your life on helping them get to those solutions, you're going to be in great shape. And one of them has to be problem solving. It's got to be goal setting. It's got to be decision making. And then everyone's got their own individual list. I certainly have my own.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Oftentimes, and we work with parents a lot, they've got a 15-year-old child. And so their timeline, they haven't been intentional for the
Right.
first 15 years. They've been caring and they've been well-meaning, but they find themselves, if they're hearing some of these topics about being intentional and they're realizing the threats of the culture and they're going, wow, my son or my daughter's in 10th grade. What do I do? And so I basically suggest a pared down version of what you said, which is, okay, they're going to graduate soon and be heading off to college most likely. So what are the 3 or 4 things that are qualities, and then life skills, qualities and life skills that you can use your discretionary time as mom and dad to instill, your evenings, your weekends, and your vacations can be great times, but they can also be great plus intentional. And so even if you're in 10th grade, even if it's, it's tougher if it's the fall of senior year, but it's never too late to have an influence that will linger, and create a positive grown-up at age 30. But I love that. So let's transition to the principles behind a successful nation, because I think that's one of the elements that we share. One of the things we have in common is the concern for what's happening to the collective mindset of the country, and freedom, and how that translates to individuals. But you brought up a topic that some people, it seems like, are scared to talk about, like the deep state. And I believe that exists more with each day. I don't know how to define it. You seem like you're further ahead in that regard. But if you'd asked me maybe 5 or 8 years ago, I wouldn't have exactly known about that. But it seems that there is this force of, I don't know, government, society, culture to get everybody to kind of think the same way. And that seems so at odds with not only what you and I do for a living to help people be successful and self-reliant, but it also seems at odds with what you referred to as the first principles that have underpinned the country for centuries. So let's start there. What is the deep state, and what motivated you to write those recent articles, which are fantastic, on those threats, and to get our head out of the sand?
Well, Tommy, this could be a controversial one, and I'm fine with that, because I make no apology for it. These are my beliefs, and I've been on this planet long enough to feel that they're quite valid. The deep state we'll come to in a second. What I want people to understand is that this is the largest psychological experiment that has ever taken place in humanity. That we know, MIT does tests, Harvard does tests, they do behavioral, scientist tests, and all of this type of stuff to understand different stimuli and impacts of colors and pictures and things on different people. But the reality is that this is warfare right now. I mean, we're being told that we have to wear a mask, but then it's so contradictory. There's no consistency from one city to the next. There's no from one mayor to the next. There's exceptions to every rule. It's like, why even bother? It is the most ridiculous thing, quite frankly, that I have seen. Now, do I have any scientific evaluation? But no. But I can tell you, I understand when someone's trying to control me, and when someone's trying to manipulate me, and someone's
just intuitively, you've got common sense, you've got instincts.
Oh, without a doubt. But I understand messaging. All of this type of stuff is just kind of ridiculous. And it's all, there's what's called the psychology of crowd control, and that's really kind of what's being used at this point in time against us. And you create a boogeyman, in this case, COVID-19, and you're going to die if you get this. And so that becomes the natural enemy. And then you create division amongst people, black against white, men against women, transgender against bi. Then you start to go through, it continues to go on. Then it's pro-choice or pro-life, and it's this and it's that. And everything that and it's intentional. It is designed to get people to not focusing on what's really going on. And what's really going on, remember you used the word before about sameness?
Yes.
Well, let's just go back and define globalization if you want to have a good understanding of it. You know, when I was 18, I already had two businesses. I started as a teenager. You know, I was already worth $1 million at 21. That was the hard way, not today's through a stock offering. I mean, this was knocking on doors and making it happen. But I remember when I sold the second business, I hitchhiked throughout Europe, and I absolutely loved it. You know, flew over by myself, backpack, stayed in a hostel, and I went from Italy and Rome and Malta and everywhere, you know, in Greece and so forth. I had a great time, and I loved the cultures and everything else. Well, nowadays it's the same. It's one economy. It's one form of currency. It's one this and that. And essentially, the big thing that these guys want to do is they want the entire world to look like the way America does right now, with a Home Depot on the corner and a CVS drugs over here, and to be one holistic thing, one religion, one currency, one government, one way of thinking, and that's really what it comes down to. That is frightening.
And I see that happening, but what I don't understand is who is driving this?
Okay, that's easy. So who is driving this? When you see groups such as the Bilderbergs, and that's where you need to start to look at and so forth, this is a group of very wealthy people who get together and who essentially they come up and they decide exactly how the world is going to be run. And that's really a large part of it. But even, you're not too far from this place. And if anyone is listening, what you need to do is look up Jekyll Island and understand how the Federal Reserve was actually created. But I'm going to advise everybody to go and download an ebook. It's free. It's called Billions for Bankers. Just go find it online. Billions for Bankers.
Okay.
Yes. It's about 40 pages long PDF that was written in 1952, maybe even 48. It's as relevant today. You have a pastor who took the time to describe exactly what just took place and how, at that point in time when Woodrow Wilson was the president, essentially how he was influenced to sign over the banking law in order to be selected, if you will, as president of the United States, because the bankers, the Rockefellers, and a few other people had gotten together and they signed over. Many people think the Federal Reserve is a federal organization. It's not. It's owned by a handful of families. And I mean, it's owned by a handful of families, that's all. And these people control all the money, all the influence, all the debt, and it's the reason why we've had wars and a whole host of things over the course of society. But as time has gone on, what you have is these people there's a lot of interest in controlling the Senate and controlling the military and controlling the House and controlling this and that. And sadly, there's a lot of people who will do things for money, for a house on the beach, and will do things and they'll sell out their country. They'll compromise themselves. They will destroy the future in order for them to enjoy whatever short life on earth that they currently have. And that's the sad, honest truth.
So is this something that is pervasive amongst the two political parties?
Oh, without a doubt, but it's definitely more left-leaning. And not to sit here and say you got to vote this way or that way, but the fact is it's much more radical from that standpoint and leans in the direction of the left, without a doubt.
So of disrupting the principles of the nation that would obviously be at odds with that sort of globalization or uniformity of thought. I mean, it just kind of makes sense.
Well, listen, here's the thing. You have to take a time and see what's coming out of the mouths of a lot of people. You're hearing a lot about universal basic income. You've heard the term.
Yes.
And essentially what it is and this was talked about by Andrew Yang. This was talked about by Elizabeth Warren. This was talked about a number of people who basically says, yes, we want to give everybody a check for $1,200. And Yang said $2,000 every month to do something with, or whatever the case might be. And if you do that, and that winds up being the way with which people live, all people, sadly, unfortunately, people are not going to be empowered to go out and start a business. They're not going to be empowered to go out and lift a finger. They're going to sit home, watch TV, and become very apathetic. There'll be no challenge, no fight, no problems to solve, nothing to do. They will just merely exist, and they will be pawns for a small group of people who are, living the life they want.
So is it a little bit like, do you know that fable in one of those recent articles where they got where they got the, was it the sheep fable, or what was the animal that you talked about where they knew that they were going to be slaughtered? So the shepherd, if you will, was decided to change the strategy and make him really comfortable and give them everything they wanted, and then
Right.
they still got slaughtered. Do you know that well enough to tell it?
I do, yeah. Essentially, the shepherd was tired of having his sheep run around and so forth, so he needed to come up with a new way. So he hired a magician, and what the magician did was the magician hypnotized the sheep. And this is an old parable, an old kind of thing, goes back many decades. And essentially, what he told the sheep was that your master, that guy over there, has your best interest in hand. He knows what's best for you. Trust him, and so forth. And essentially, what basic people are doing is they're basically just kind of fall into that belief, and they become hypnotized by that belief, by that seed that's planted in their own minds. Long story short, they wind up with the same outcome. They wind up getting slaughtered at the end, but they get slaughtered with the thought that this is for my own good. It's just really crazy the way this whole thing is kind of put together. And this is the problem when people don't think for themselves, and don't realize that their freedoms are being stolen. So let's just back it up a little bit. Number one, if you look at the riots now compared to riots, and I talk about riots legitimately back in the time of Martin Luther King, these people were dignified. They wore a suit and tie. They went and basically kind of, when Rosa Parks was on the bus, she didn't burn the bus down, tip it over, and call somebody names and spit on them and everything else. I mean, it was just this vile behavior that we're seeing is an embarrassment to humanity. But I think the people who fought for and died for the freedoms that you and I get would be embarrassed, ashamed at the way with which many people are behaving these days.
Yeah, and I think even more embarrassed about how it's being tolerated, right?
Well, that's the thing that you need to understand is that we live, tolerate is a great word, because if you tolerate injustice, essentially you've given a green light for it to continue to repeat. That's why from one city to the next, when you tell the police to stand down and let people burn your city down, it'll happen in Chicago, it'll happen in Philadelphia, it'll happen in Seattle, it'll happen in Portland, it'll happen wherever else it's going to do, because you have given it the green light. Now they know what it is. And whatever it is if you tolerate injustice, if you tolerate negativity, if you tolerate somebody calling you names, you tolerate somebody beating you, and all of that type of stuff, again, what you put up with, you end up with. And our politicians essentially are setting some very, very bad precedent. And it's unfortunate. It really is. And the fact is, to live a civilized society, you need rules. There's nothing wrong with that. There's right and wrong. There's red lights and green lights, and we respect those, and they're universal. Nowadays, it seems like that's a foreign concept to a lot of people.
Yeah, it seems like it's a deliberate effort to blur right from wrong, to make it confusing or subjective, or, well, Gary, you say that's wrong, but my truth is that is not wrong. So, you're speaking the truth,
mm-hmm.
and a lot of people aren't speaking the truth. And I'm probably, I don't know whether anybody will like what I'm about to say, but the people that are trying to move us away from our first principles, and those that do not espouse individualism, rugged individualism, those, I don't blame them. I don't blame the left as much as I blame what I would call the right, because the passivity for those who know better, for example, if you know better and you didn't do anything, you're a big part of the problem. We have peers who know better, who don't do anything. I know board members who vote for crazy ideas, who don't believe in them, but they don't have the backbone to stand up and speak out. And I think the bigger problem is not the people with the crazy ideas, but the greater number of people who know they're crazy ideas and stand down.
I understand. And, it's funny. I don't know if you noticed lately that there were 4 whistleblowers that were awarded like $135 million. This was last week. And I applaud that, because these are people who stood by their convictions. In the past, and I think still even now, the whistleblowers are getting attacked. And if you think about what is a whistleblower, somebody who's spotting out and bringing to light an injustice and doing the right thing, and they wind up getting crucified for it. But the thing about it is, most people, and we see this with our politicians, we see it with so many places, see it in the police department, everywhere else, is that people are afraid to fight for principle. They really are. And they'll subjugate themselves. They will surrender because they don't want to lose their job.
Why is that happening, Gary? Why is that happening? Because it seems like not long ago, people would stand up and speak out and fight back. Is it because of the nature of the media today that you can be put under a spotlight and highlighted as the villain who is going against the opinion of the day kind of thing? I mean, where are all the people that have the backbone and the spine and that are willing to go out on a limb? Where did they go?
Yeah, they don't. And this is why you said three things earlier when we talked about goals guy, 100-day challenge, everything counts. The other thing is what I spend a lot of time repeating is behavior never lies, 3 words. And your words are irrelevant. Honestly, at the end of the day, who you are is what you do. That's just the way the world works. And most people talk. They talk and talk and talk about integrity. We've seen James Comey do that. They talk about, conviction and so forth. But, until you really defend those and really take the time to really say, you know what, this is a line that you do not cross. This is a Rubicon that we don't go past. People will surrender for fear. They don't want to lose their income. They don't want to be embarrassed or so forth. Now, I acknowledge that the first thing opposing parties do is they attack your reputation, they make up lies, and they do all these type of things. And these are huge costs. But I'll tell you, there is somebody right now in the House who people don't, and many people are probably aware of it, but people need to pay attention to Devin Nunes. This is a gentleman who I've got to tell you, he fought for 4 years for the last, and it's not that so much that he's defending Trump, he was just defending, the truth. Right. All of this nonsense that went on with Russian interference and so on and so forth. And if it wasn't for him, I'll be very frank with you, it would frighten me. And that was just one man. But I'll tell you this much. When you go back and look at history, and you look at history is great because it gives us a guide as to how to move forward in the future. The people who we're going to be most proud of, and maybe you and I may not even see this during our lifetimes, but it'll be in the history book in future generations, is somebody who defended freedom, somebody who stood up to injustice, somebody who said we will no longer allow this to continue to repeat itself, and so forth. There has to be, and I think right now, personally, that we currently have a leader who's willing to say many of those things. Not the smoothest, not the most polished guy in the world, but there's a lot of truth to that. But here's the crazy part about it is we look at whether it's a Martin Luther King or a Rosa Parks I just mentioned or a Nelson Mandela or anything else, because they finally stood up to injustice and they said, no more, it's going to stop. And those are going to be the people who we champion, who we celebrate, and who ultimately turn the tide on a lot of the madness that's going on right now, because all we're seeing is a lot of lies, mistruths. And what saddens me about all of this, honestly, is that at the end of the day, a civil society needs to be able to trust someone's word. We need to be able to know when someone makes a promise that they'll keep it. If they make a commitment, they'll honor it. And if they set a goal, they'll achieve it. It's as simple as that. And we're at a point right now, especially even with artificial intelligence, and there's a whole new form of copywriting that is now being done by computers that are programmed to write negative press releases and so forth. This is just the reality of it. But I've read some statistics recently that in the next year alone, that 95% of all news on the media will be false or misleading.
Wow.
You start to look at numbers like that. You even get it to the 50%, but we're talking about the majority of it will all be done with a bias to either sell a product, to offset a weakness, to get somebody elected, or to do something like this, and to control and manipulate people. And unfortunately, people will take that information they see online and they will believe it is true. And listen, I love my grandmother. My grandmother was the type of person that right now would be so frightened and intimidated by stuff because she used to read the National Enquirer. And I'd say to her, when I was 12, I'd say, Grandma, come on, seriously? You're reading this about aliens? And she'd be like, they couldn't put it in the paper if it wasn't true. And I think there's a lot of people who, just because somebody said it on CNN or on this, or it's on the newspaper or whatever, that is true. It's not. That's the part about it.
Yeah, there's a quality of discernment that is missing. There's some of discernment comes from, from understanding timeless truths, especially biblical truths. It's from living for a long time. It's from being around people who are wise. And so you're able to look at confusing information, make sense out of it, and then discern truth from fiction. But there's a lot of word games that are going on today that I think make it difficult for people. And maybe it's why people still have their head in the sand. So many people have their head in the sand, is that phrase I alluded to earlier, my truth. I believe truth is truth. It's independent of you or me. Truth is not something that I can claim ownership to, or you can claim ownership to. It is truth. Now, you can have your opinion and I can have my opinion, and somebody listening to us can have a different opinion, and that's fine. But if you start calling your opinion the truth, if we don't have a common foundation of what is real and what is not real, what is true and what is not true, we can't even communicate with one another. If you believe that everybody is dying and everybody is threatened by COVID, and I don't, we can't even have a conversation that's meaningful if we can't look at statistics from the CDC that clearly spell out the facts and go, these are the facts. And if you go, well, no, they're not. I don't feel that way.
Sure.
And we can't have a communication. So let's close in talking about some of the things we have 2 or 3 things you think we need to get back to help us come, not unify. I don't think we need to unify. That's one of the to me, that I think is a kind of a off to the side thing, talking about the country needs to be unified. It'd be great if the country's unified, but I think what we need to do is get back to the truth. If we get back to the truth, the unification will come at the right time. But I think we're in a phase of development of the country, just like children go through phases, adults go through phases. I think we're going through a phase now where we're fighting for what is the truth. But I don't think we can be unified until we can at least say, this is true and this is not true. Any call to action for us as a country or as individuals to get back to the truth and back to the basics?
If you went to a counselor, and this is what every psychotherapist wants you to get to, they'll tell you, but maybe not in these clearer words, but all growth, all maturity, all progress, all change begins with an acceptance of the truth. That an alcoholic, he'll say, I'm not an alcoholic. He'll have other people to enable his weakness. This could be somebody with a gambling addiction or anything along that way. But until that person accepts the reality that, this is a problem. I have created this. It's bigger than me and I need help. Until they come to accept those facts and that reality, they will continue to deny it and deny it and deny it. And that's just unfortunate. And we live in a state where there's so much denial. But, we're both Christian businessmen. So let's just go back to first principles and make it real simple, okay? We both know the phrase, where there is no vision, the people perish. And to me, the biggest challenge, put aside everything, truth, nonsense, everything that's going on, I have not seen a grand vision, from anybody, quite frankly, in quite a long time. I mean, what is this country going to do? There needs to be a vision related towards science, towards engineering, towards medicine, towards ethics, towards a number of different things. It really does. And it needs to be spoken, and there need to be some leaders who basically will put that out there. But I see a lot of people that are just frightened, that are small, that are blaming other people, just playing nonsense and so forth. But essentially, we need a leader with a big, broad, compassionate vision. And it doesn't mean it's going to be easy, because I think, sadly, and this is the part that people don't understand, we're in so much debt, we have so many problems, that we're not going to get to the other side without a good degree of suffering. And I don't think anyone wants to hear that, but that really is the truth. And most people are not built for suffering right now. They're not built for hard times. And that's just the nature of this beast. We're going to be dealing with hyperinflation. We're going to be dealing with higher taxes. We're going to be dealing with less choice. You're going to be dealing with censorship. We're going to be dealing with many of your rights compromised or just flat out stolen. Your privacy. Everyone loves the free stuff from Google and everything else, but you know what? These rotten SOBs have stolen just about every piece of data that you have. They don't care about you. You're not even a human being. You're just a series of statistics that they can sell to another.
You're the product. You're the product.
That's it. That is exactly the reality of it, and people need to wake up and realize that.
Well, that's great. I wish we could go on and on, but I'd like to connect everybody with you. Gary Ryan Blair, 100-Day Challenge. Any other way to get in touch with you, or is that the best way?
Yeah, that's the best way. Just go over 100daychallenge.com and you'll find out, and then you can reach out and get in contact with me right from that page.
Well, that is fantastic. So when I started, I said there were 3 things that I think of when I think of Gary Ryan Blair, and that's the 100-Day Challenge and Everything Counts and the Goals Guy. And now I'm adding one more, which is Behavior Never Lies, which is fantastic. Thank you very much, Gary. Hope we can do this again sometime.
I look forward to it. Count on it, bud. Thanks, Tommy.